before America had billionaires. One man sold snake oil and built an empire of control. Before the oil wells, before the skyscrapers, there was a man known not as a tycoon, but as a con artist. William Avery Rockefeller, the patriarch of America's richest dynasty, didn't sell fuel. He sold lies, and he sold them well. He called himself Dr. Bill Livingston, celebrated cancer specialist, a fake doctor peddling potions made of turpentine and snake fat. His wagon creaked down dirt roads under the smell of whiskey and oil. The townsfolk remembered his grin, yellow-toothed, confident, and dangerous. That grin would seed a family legacy that haunted generations. William was secretly a bigamist, living two double lives across two states. He fathered children under false names, abandoning one family while raising another. To escape justice, he changed his identity so many times that even his grave might not belong to him. Every fortune begins somewhere dark, and for the Rockefellers, it began with fraud. John D. Rockefeller, his son, would later confess that he learned one rule from his father: never tell anyone how much money you have. That rule wasn't just advice. It was the seed of a dynasty built on secrecy. Visceral detail. In the oil boom towns of the mid-1800s, the air reeked of kerosene and sweat. Miners' boots struck the mud while William's booming voice echoed through fairs, promising eternal health from a bottle that stung like fire when it touched the tongue. Historians discovered evidence suggesting William was once accused of rape and theft, and escaped under a false medical license. Those documents vanished from county archives in the 1890s, erased, perhaps by hands that already knew the Rockefeller name would rule America's wealth. How does a liar, a thief, and a snake oil peddler create the bloodline of billionaires? John D. would later use his father's ruthless instincts to crush competitors, manipulate prices, and dominate the American oil industry through Standard Oil, the same way William dominated the gullible through trickery. The methods were different, but the heart was the same. By the early 1900s, when Rockefeller wealth reached the billions, whispers began spreading in churches and newspapers that the family was cursed, that every fortune gained through deception demands a price. 3 generations of Rockefellers would die under strange, sudden circumstances, and some say it all began with William's curse. Modern parallel. Today, the Rockefeller descendants face lawsuits, scandals, and divisions inside their own foundations, echoing the deceit their patriarch once thrived on. Even in the 21st century, some claim the curse hasn't faded. It's only evolved into power plays and quiet betrayals inside boardrooms. The curse began with a con man. John D. Rockefeller would rise from his father's shadow, not to escape it, but to perfect it. But one secret was still waiting. He turned black oil into liquid power, and no one could stop him. John D. Rockefeller was not born into wealth, he was born into calculation. By age 12, he was lending money to neighbors with interest. By 18, he had mastered the art of silence, learning that the less people knew, the more control he held. The smell of oil would soon dominate his destiny. Cleveland, 1863, the air thick with the tang of crude, the clang of hammers from refineries. Men saw oil as fuel. John D. saw it as leverage. Rockefeller didn't just compete with rivals. He controlled them through secret railroad deals and sabotage. He quietly bribed transport barons to charge his competitors double. Then, when they went bankrupt, he bought their companies for pennies. His empire, Standard Oil, was built not only on barrels, but on fear. Executives whispered about the invisible hand that could make or break fortunes overnight. That hand was Rockefeller's, hidden behind layers of trusts and fake subsidiaries. Visceral sensory cue. Inside Standard Oil's Cleveland office, the ticking of clocks and the scratch of quills filled the room. Not a word out of place. Employees said even the air felt watched. Documents later revealed Rockefeller used spies inside rival firms, posing as janitors and clerks. These informants fed him pricing secrets that crushed competitors before they even knew they were in danger. When the U.S. government tried to intervene, it was too late. By 1882, Rockefeller controlled over 90% of America's oil. The courts called it a monopoly. Rockefeller called it efficiency. Was Standard Oil a business empire, or the first shadow government of America? His influence seeped into politics, railroads, even newspapers. Senators took his calls before the president. Preachers blessed his philanthropy, while ordinary families paid higher prices for the fuel he monopolized. Behind closed doors, Rockefeller began funding secret religious societies, believing God had chosen him to rule industry. In private letters, he referred to his fortune as a divine test, yet those who defied him met ruin or worse. By the early 1900s, the Rockefeller name became both sacred and feared. When the Supreme Court finally ordered the breakup of Standard Oil in 1911, Rockefeller smiled. Overnight, the shares split and his wealth multiplied. The curse wasn't broken, it had evolved. Modern parallel. Today's tech moguls echo Rockefeller's blueprint, controlling data instead of oil, manipulating markets with the same ruthless precision. The tools changed, but the hunger stayed identical. He didn't build an empire, he built obedience. But behind every empire lies blood. And soon, that blood would come from his own family. But one secret was still waiting. When the nation realized who owned its oil, it was already too late. By the late 1800s, the name Standard Oil had become both a marvel and a menace. Trains thundered across America carrying barrels stamped with the same Black Eagle logo. Rockefeller's empire stretched from Cleveland to New York and into the veins of the nation itself. The streets smelled of crude oil and burning kerosene. Smoke hung over cities like a crown of soot. Newspapers praised Rockefeller as a genius, but behind the praise lurked dread. Competitors vanished, whistleblowers went bankrupt, and refineries that resisted were mysteriously destroyed in accidental fires. Fire inspectors later confessed they'd been paid to declare Rockefeller's rivals, blazes, as natural causes. Insurance records disappeared overnight, and no one dared to point fingers at Standard Oil, because Rockefeller owned their lenders too. Journalist Ida Tarbell, one of the first women to take on industrial giants, began investigating the empire. Her father had once been ruined by Rockefeller's monopoly. Her exposés shook the nation, each article another hammer blow on the illusion of fairness. Visceral sensory cue. When Tarbell interviewed refinery workers, she described the sickly sweet stench of oil clinging to their skin, the coughs echoing in the tunnels, and the eerie silence whenever the word Rockefeller was spoken. Fear had a smell, and it smelled like kerosene. Tarbell's letters were intercepted, and witnesses she sought began disappearing or refusing to speak. Still, her series, The History of the Standard Oil Company, exposed the empire's manipulations to millions. igniting America's first true corporate outrage. How do you destroy a man who already owns the system built to punish him? Rockefeller responded the way his father would have, not with anger but strategy. He flooded charities, hospitals, and universities with donations. Newspapers that once accused him suddenly praised his philanthropy. He didn't silence his enemies, he outlasted them. Behind his donations, Rockefeller was buying influence. Entire boards of education, medical foundations, and public health councils became loyal to his name. It wasn't charity, it was control disguised as kindness. Public outrage peaked when the Supreme Court finally moved to break up Standard Oil. Crowds cheered until they realized the stock split made Rockefeller even richer. The curse was laughing, and it wore a smile shaped like a dollar sign. Modern parallel. Today's billionaires follow the same path, public charity masking monopolies. Social media platforms, tech empires, and energy giants echo Rockefeller's playbook. Buy influence, then rewrite the story. He owned the oil and the truth. As Rockefeller's wealth reached divine levels, whispers began inside his own home that the fortune was cursed. And the next to feel it would be his children. But one secret was still waiting. He built a fortress to protect his children, but the curse was already inside. At the height of his power, John D. Rockefeller had everything: wealth beyond imagination, respect that bordered on worship, and a dynasty destined to rule for generations. But inside his stone mansion at Kikuit, the world's richest family lived like prisoners. Servants whispered of strict schedules, locked doors, and the echo of John Dee's footsteps packing through candle-lit halls. He didn't allow laughter at the dinner table. Even his children were forbidden from speaking unless spoken to. John D. believed the devil would steal his fortune if his family showed pride. He forced his children to record every penny they spent in ledgers, even nickels for candy. When his son, John Jr., once bought a small toy without permission, Rockefeller punished him with silence for a week. This wasn't discipline. It was control. The same control that ruled the oil fields now ruled his bloodline. Visceral sensory detail. The mansion smelled of polished mahogany and burning oil lamps. Outside, winter winds howled through the Hudson Valley, but inside, silence was absolute, thick, suffocating, holy. One child allegedly began sleepwalking, whispering numbers, oil prices in the dark halls. Family physicians dismissed it as stress, but Rockefeller's wife, Seti, wrote in her diary that something unnatural moves through this house. The entry vanished after her death. John Jr. would grow up under his father's unyielding shadow, obedient, devout, and broken, where John Sr. saw strategy, Jr. saw sin. He tried to redeem the family name through faith and charity, funding churches, Bible schools, and universities. But no amount of goodness could erase the darkness of the empire's birth. Can a man buy salvation for a soul that was never his to sell? A hidden family letter revealed John Jr. once wrote, "Father's God is prophet and his gospel is oil." The letter, discovered decades later, painted the Rockefellers not as a family, but as a dynasty built on guilt. When John D. died in 1937, his funeral was private, guarded, almost secretive. Family members stood in silence as the preacher called him America's greatest benefactor. But outside the gates, protesters held signs that read oil and blood. Modern parallel. Even today, the Rockefeller Foundation wrestles with its legacy, investing in environmental causes while its fortune was built on fossil fuel domination. History doesn't forget the hands that struck the match. He built a palace for silence. John Jr. would inherit not only the empire but its ghosts. And one day, one of his own sons would vanish into thin air. But one secret was still waiting. Beneath the Rockefeller estate in Sleepy Hollow, archivists discovered something that would shake the world's most powerful dynasty. A set of sealed letters, marked with the family crest, and dated 1892. Inside them were chilling confessions, handwritten notes that spoke of dreams filled with fire, voices demanding devotion, and warnings never meant to be read. One letter, believed to be from John D. Rockefeller himself, mentioned a phrase repeated over and over. "We built our fortune not on oil, but on obedience." Historians brushed it off as symbolism, but others saw a pattern, a family whose rise was too swift, whose wealth seemed unnatural. Each letter hinted at a shadowy agreement, a promise that could not be broken, even by death. Some say these writings were metaphors. Others insist they were proof of a pact, the price of power paid in blood and legacy. And perhaps that's why, even today, every Rockefeller heir speaks carefully, smiles rarely, and disappears from public life without warning, as if something ancient still watches, ensuring the pact remains unbroken. He had everything, yet trusted no one, not even his own blood. In the 1930s, the Rockefellers were untouchable. Their oil empire powered nations, their banks influenced presidents, and their foundations shaped education and medicine. But behind the iron gates of their mansions, something began to fracture. The great halls that once echoed with laughter now trembled with whispers. Servants spoke of locked rooms, midnight arguments, and John D. Rockefeller Jr. packing for hours, muttering about the watchers, unseen figures he claimed were tracking the family's every move. A series of mysterious illnesses struck the family, unexplained fainting spells, sudden fevers, and vivid nightmares shared among multiple heirs. Doctors called it stress. Insiders called it the curse resurfacing. One Rockefeller heiress wrote in her diary, "Our wealth is no longer protection, it's bait." By the 1940s, the empire began to splinter under its own shadow. The family withdrew from the public eye, funding projects under aliases and burning thousands of documents. What were they hiding? Did the Rockefellers fear exposure, or something far older hunting them from within their own legacy? In 1953, a private family vault caught fire, destroying rare portraits and coded journals. But one item survived, a single oil-stained note that read, "The pact remains until the last heir forgets." The smell of burned paper and oil filled the estate for days, a scent that servants swore never left the walls. To this day, modern billionaires like the Musks and Bezoses are compared to the Rockefellers, yet none dare repeat their pattern of isolation and secrecy. It's as if the world learned, some power isn't meant to be inherited. But one secret was still waiting, a secret buried beneath the foundations of the very church the Rockefellers built to cleanse their name. They built a church to hide their sins, not to confess them. In the early 1900s, John D. Rockefeller funded the construction of the Riverside Church in New York City, a towering Gothic cathedral meant to symbolize faith, charity, and redemption. But hidden in its architecture were symbols no Christian architect could explain. Above the altar, stonemasons carved a series of unusual sigils, suns, eyes, and serpents intertwined. Beneath the choir floor, A sealed vault accessible only by the family was said to hold records of great significance. Decades later, when restorers tried to open the vault, they were ordered to stop by a private Rockefeller attorney. He claimed it was a historical preservation issue. But witnesses say that night, guards removed something heavy and humming. Some whispered it was the original pact, the one that promised the Rockefellers dominance in exchange for eternal obedience. The church, a place of peace, began to exude something else entirely, a presence. Choir singers spoke of hearing low voices during rehearsals, chanting in an unknown language. The organ would play faint notes, even when no one touched it. Was the Riverside Church built for worship, or as a monument to an unholy contract? Years later, David Rockefeller secretly funded restoration projects under the guise of charity, each focused on preserving this church's hidden chambers. But internal memos revealed the true purpose: to contain what must not resurface. The scent of old stone, wax, and something metallic filled the air, like a tomb trying to breathe. Even now, the church stands tall, visited by millions. Few notice the subtle carvings of snakes around its windows, or the fact that one stained glass angel has no face at all. Modern investigators claim the church's crypt aligns perfectly with an underground energy grid beneath Manhattan, a design eerily similar to ancient occult maps. And when that grid was disturbed during a 2019 construction project, seismic sensors recorded a low-frequency sound deep beneath the church that lasted exactly 66 seconds. Their church wasn't holy, it was haunted. Just like how billion-dollar tech foundations today promise philanthropy, yet quietly expand their global control, the Rockefellers may have written the original blueprint for sanctifying power through secrecy. But one secret was still waiting, beneath the stone floor where light never reaches. The ocean didn't take him, something else did. In November 1961, Michael Rockefeller, the 23-year-old son of New York's governor and heir to one of the richest empires in the world, vanished off the coast of New Guinea. His body was never found. The official story said his canoe capsized. He tried to swim to shore. He drowned, but that's not what the locals believed. According to the Asmat tribesmen, a white man reached their shore that night, exhausted, terrified, clutching a carved wooden idol. Hours later, the drums began. Witnesses from nearby villages claimed the Rockefellers' private team arrived days later, burning huts and silencing witnesses. One missionary who spoke about the case mysteriously disappeared. His last journal entry read, "They came for something more than his body." The air in New Guinea that night was thick, humid, electric, carrying the scent of sea salt and smoke. Fishermen swore they saw lights hovering above the mangroves, and the water rippled with no wind. Was Michael Rockefeller a victim, or the final offering in a family pact that demanded renewal? Years later, leaked CIA files hinted that the Rockefellers may have negotiated with tribal elders to keep the truth hidden, not out of shame, but fear. Fear that the curse had reached across oceans. And then came a chilling detail. Michael's final letters home spoke of ancient carvings that reminded him of the family crest. When researchers analyzed those carvings decades later, they found matching designs on the stained glass serpent windows of the Riverside Church. If Michael's death was a sacrifice, the curse didn't end, it expanded. Because soon after his disappearance, Rockefeller oil operations spread into Indonesia, the same region where he vanished. The heir didn't drown, he was claimed. Like today's powerful families who send their heirs into philanthropic missions abroad, Michael's journey was meant to prove compassion. Instead, it exposed how power and fate are often intertwined in the most brutal ways imaginable. But one secret was still waiting, buried in the jungle where the screams were last heard. One Rockefeller child was born in silence and erased in fire. In 1914, a year before World War I, a quiet scandal rippled through the corridors of the Rockefeller estate. Servants spoke of a young woman sent away, heavily pregnant, and a child born under another name, never to be claimed. Officially, the family dismissed it as rumor, but confidential hospital ledgers tell a different story, a Rockefeller signature next to an unrecorded birth, and beside it a single word: containment. The child reportedly vanished within weeks, yet decades later, a man surfaced in rural Massachusetts claiming to be the lost Rockefeller. His features were uncanny, the same angular jaw, the same piercing stare. But when journalists investigated, his house burned down the next morning. He was never seen again. The smell of kerosene and rain lingered in the air for days. A scent, witnesses said, felt like the family reclaiming what was theirs. Was this heir a threat to the fortune, or to the curse itself? A historian uncovered a suppressed letter from 1932 where John D. Rockefeller Jr. wrote cryptically, "A fracture has appeared in the line. It must be mended before it spreads." That fracture, some believe, was the bloodline of the hidden child, one untouched by the pact, one who could end it. For years, whispers spoke of secret meetings, silent payments, and private investigators hired not to find, but to erase. Every document, every photograph, every witness, gone. But in 1999, a DNA test on a blood sample from a museum artifact, an old Rockefeller pocket watch, revealed anomalies. Two genetic markers didn't match the recorded lineage. If that's true, the curse didn't end with the main family. It splintered into two lines, one wealthy and watched, the other hidden and hunted. Even today, billion-dollar families rewrite genealogies, bury scandals, and erase illegitimate heirs from the public record. But unlike others, the Rockefellers didn't just protect their name. They protected the curse. And somewhere out there, if that hidden bloodline survived, it may be the only force capable of breaking the pact or resurrecting it. They erased a child to protect a curse. But one secret was still waiting, locked inside a vault that should never have been opened. What if the real Rockefeller story is still locked underground? Few people know this. Beneath a quiet estate in Picantico Hills, New York, lies a heavily guarded underground chamber. The Rockefellers call it simply the vault. It's said to hold over 200,000 private records, letters, contracts, and ledgers, chronicling the rise of the oil dynasty. But dozens of archivists whisper that not all of it is historical. Some say there are files in there no one is allowed to touch, the Red Collection. The vault hums with cold air and polished steel. Motion sensors guard every corner. But one former employee, speaking under anonymity, claimed he saw a document stamped with a chilling phrase: Covenant of Light, 1872. Inside were details of an agreement, signatures not just from John D. Rockefeller, but from names erased from every public record. Among them, a clergyman, a banker, and someone known only as the Keeper. Every 50 years, the letter said, the pact must be affirmed in secrecy to ensure the continuation of wealth and lineage. The last recorded affirmation. 1972. So what happened in 2022, the next cycle? The Rockefeller Archive Center went into partial lockdown for structural maintenance. Staff were removed, surveillance footage deleted, but researchers say a massive transfer of sealed crates occurred that same week to an undisclosed location. What? What if those crates didn't hold papers, but relics of a ritual the family swore to repeat? The smell of ozone and aged paper filled the air as workers described the electric hum from inside the containers. One man quit the next morning, claiming he heard chanting from within the steel. When independent journalists tried to investigate, every digital trace of their research, videos, photos, notes, vanished. Even today, corporations hide decades of scandals inside offshore archives, locked behind philanthropy and legal walls. But the Rockefellers, they might have been the blueprint for that system's secrecy masquerading as history. And the deeper researchers dig, the clearer it becomes. This vault isn't a record of power, it's a record of debt. Because the covenant of light ended with one final line, written in fatting ink. When the last vault opens, so too shall the debt be paid. Power comes with a debt, and theirs is due. But one secret was still waiting, buried behind a wall no one dares to break. He swore an oath to protect them, and vanished the moment he broke it. For decades, every secret the Rockefeller family owned, every classified document, private deal, or forbidden record passed through one man's hands. Edward Larson, the family's chief archivist. A quiet, educated man with no family, no public life, and no traceable past before 1958. He was known as the Guardian. To outsiders, he was a simple librarian. But behind the reinforced doors of the Picantico estate, Larson held keys that opened the vaults no Rockefeller would enter themselves. In 2003, Larson wrote a 17-page letter to his niece in Massachusetts. It was never mailed. Found later in an estate sale, the letter spoke of voices in the archive, lights flickering near the sealed section, and dreams of oil dripping from the ceiling, whispering his name. The most haunting line read, "They told me to preserve history, but what I've preserved isn't history anymore." After that, he resigned. No explanation, no press release, just gone. A month later, his house burned to the ground. No remains were found, only a melted keyring engraved with the Rockefeller crest. Did Edward Larson uncover something he wasn't supposed to? Or did something come for him after he did? Years later, a whistleblower from the Rockefeller Foundation claimed Larson had secretly copied microfilms of forbidden documents. Those reels reportedly contained the original Covenant of Light and an unmarked black ledger detailing transactions between the Rockefellers and unnamed foreign benefactors. The reels were never found, but an encrypted email sent from Larson's account days before the fire contained one line: "Debt paid, but not by them." Investigators dismissed it as nonsense, but those who knew him claimed Larson had grown obsessed with the family's spiritual rituals, particularly their link to the Riverside Church's silent chamber. The air in that church reportedly turned icy cold whenever Larson entered, as if the place itself recognized him. Just as modern corporations have whistleblowers who disappear after exposing dark truths, Larson became the prototype of loyalty turned to sacrifice. But the files he tried to protect didn't die with him, because 2 years later, someone began leaking fragments of his letters online, signed only with one word: Guardian. He kept their secret until it consumed him. But one secret was still waiting, hidden in the digital code of a letter that refused to burn. He was one of the richest men on earth, yet his body was never found. In 1961, Michael Rockefeller, the golden heir to America's oil empire, vanished off the coast of New Guinea. His boat capsized, his companion was rescued, but Michael was never seen again. Some say he drowned, others whisper he was eaten alive by a tribe still untouched by civilization. The Rockefeller name, once a symbol of power, was now haunted by an invisible curse, one that didn't kill with poverty, but with mystery. As investigators searched, strange reports emerged: tribesmen wearing ornaments carved from human bone, Western artifacts deep in the jungle, and whispers that a white man had been taken. When Dutch officials tried to dig deeper, they were abruptly ordered to shut down the investigation. The U.S. government intervened, sealing files that remain classified to this day. The air in the jungle was thick with rot and fear, the smell of damp wood and something darker, like old blood and burnt metal. The rain fell endlessly, drenching the rescue teams as if the land itself didn't want him to be found. Could this have been the moment the Rockefeller Curse revealed its teeth? Historians note eerie patterns, the Rockefeller heirs suffering tragic fates one after another. Airplane crashes, mysterious drownings, suicides under unclear circumstances. It's as if every generation carried the same invisible mark: to rise too high was to vanish too soon. In 1973, another heir, Nelson Rockefeller, died in a scandal so hushed it never made headlines, found dead during an affair that nearly destroyed the family's political ambitions. His death wasn't the end. It was another reminder that power and purity cannot coexist for long. The richer they got, the darker it grew. Modern parallels whisper the curse never left. From the suspicious deaths of young billionaires to secret meetings of dynasties controlling global wealth, the Rockefeller story echoes through today's headlines. Every empire built on dominance eventually meets the shadow it created. His disappearance wasn't just a tragedy, it was a message. And the world's elite, they heard it loud and clear. But one secret was still waiting. Every president since 1945 owed something to the Rockefellers. Behind every handshake, every smiling photograph, and every White House dinner, there was always one name whispered with caution: Rockefeller. They didn't run for office, they built the offices. They didn't cast votes, they bought time, loyalty, and silence. Declassified documents show that David Rockefeller held private meetings with over 200 global leaders, including Kissinger, Nixon, and the Shah of Iran, long before policies were ever announced. Officially, these were economic discussions. In reality, they were chess moves in a game that decided who would rule the modern world. Inside smoke-filled rooms of the Council on Foreign Relations, Rockefeller's voice wasn't a suggestion. It was an order. You could smell the cigar smoke, hear the faint hum of typewriters, the metallic click of polished boots as men in tailored suits decided the future of entire nations. Even the CIA had its roots in Rockefeller-funded programs, covert projects disguised as economic aid. By the 1970s, the line between U.S. policy and Rockefeller interest had vanished. Were the Rockefellers really serving America, or were they building an empire of their own? Every major oil contract, every global banking alliance, every reconstruction plan in war-torn nations somehow led back to the same address: Rockefeller Center, New York. In 1974, Vice President Nelson Rockefeller stood one heartbeat away from the presidency. He had the name, the fortune, and the machinery. But then a scandal exploded. Mysterious financial records, backroom deals, and a cover-up involving billions in untraceable funds. The story died faster than it began. Newspapers went silent overnight, as if the truth itself had been paid to disappear. They didn't run the White House, they built it. From the Federal Reserve to the World Bank, the same blueprint continues: power disguised as philanthropy, control masked as charity. Their foundations shape the policies, and their policies shape the world you live in. If presidents were just pawns, then who exactly was the king? But one secret was still waiting. They didn't just control oil, they designed the system that controls you. When the world burned after World War II, most saw chaos. The Rockefellers saw opportunity. From the ashes of war, they built something more powerful than any empire. A global network of influence so vast it was nicknamed the Invisible Government. Inside the towering glass walls of the Council on Foreign Relations and later, the Trilateral Commission, decisions were made that shaped entire centuries. Presidents came and went, empires rose and fell, but the Rockefellers remained silent architects behind every geopolitical shift. In 1973, David Rockefeller founded the Trilateral Commission officially to promote cooperation between North America, Europe, and Japan. Unofficially, to centralize global control. Internal papers later revealed how this private discussion group quietly outlined the foundations of what conspiracy theorists now call the New World Order. You could almost feel the chill in the marble halls, the echo of polished shoes, the whisper of agreements signed under dim lights. Every global crisis seemed to tighten the Rockefeller grip: economic collapses, oil shortages, wars, all feeding into a system they helped design. A system that demanded chaos to maintain control. Was the New World Order really a conspiracy, or the Rockefellers' greatest creation? By the 1980s, every major global institution, the United Nations, World Bank, IMF, and even the WHO, had Rockefeller fingerprints on their blueprints. Their donations built the buildings, their foundations shaped the agendas, and their philosophies dictated who would prosper and who would starve. The air inside those boardrooms wasn't freedom. It was suffocation disguised as diplomacy. Recently declassified CIA memos show collaboration with Rockefeller-backed NGOs to influence developing nations, economic paths, all under the banner of aid. They built the system that rules the world. Yep. From Silicon Valley's global data control to billion-dollar climate funds, the same architecture remains: the descendants of Rockefeller ideology running a new digital empire. If they shaped the world's governments, what stopped them from shaping the human mind next? But one secret was still waiting. They didn't just buy industries, they bought minds. While the world obsessed over the Rockefellers' oil empire, few noticed their far darker ambition: to master the human psyche itself. To rule the future, they realized, you didn't need guns or armies. You needed control over thought. In the early 20th century, the Rockefeller Foundation quietly funded psychological experiments under the guise of education reform. They weren't teaching kids how to think, they were teaching them what to think. Curriculum designs, textbooks, even university research began aligning with Rockefeller-funded agendas. promoting obedience, conformity, and industrial efficiency. You could almost smell the ink from those freshly printed, standardized books, each word engineered to shape a generation's perception of truth. Behind closed doors, the Rockefellers funded studies into behavior modification and mass persuasion, laying the groundwork for what would become modern propaganda. They didn't invent advertising, they perfected psychological manipulation. If you could control how people think, wouldn't that be more powerful than money itself? Edward Bernays, the father of public relations and nephew of Sigmund Freud, was quietly funded by Rockefeller-linked institutions. His theories on engineering consent became the weapon of a new empire, influence. From consumer habits to political ideologies, every impulse could now be designed, predicted, and exploited. By mid-century, Rockefeller funded think tanks like the Tavistock Institute, and the Ford Foundation began experimenting with mass media psychology. Television wasn't entertainment, it was programming. The glow of the screen became the hum of obedience. The soft flicker of light, the sound of a nation falling asleep under suggestion. They mastered minds before machines. Today, that legacy thrives in algorithmic manipulation, targeted ads, and digital behavior mapping, the same principles, updated for a new century. Psychology turned into currency, and free will became the illusion of choice. If they could engineer the mind, what would stop them from engineering life itself? But one secret was still waiting. They didn't cure diseases, they created the system that profits from them. In the early 1900s, medicine was a world of healers, herbs, and hope. But when the Rockefellers arrived, they brought something else: profit. John D. Rockefeller saw that oil could do more than light lamps. It could create pharmaceuticals. And by controlling medicine itself, he could control life and death. In 1910, the Rockefeller Foundation funded the Flexner Report, a document that changed everything. It labeled traditional healers and homeopathic doctors as quacks. Overnight, natural medicine was discredited, and modern pharmaceutical schools, funded by Rockefeller money, became the new temples of science. You could almost smell the chemical tang of laboratories, replacing the earthy scent of herbal remedies. The soft prayers of healers were drowned out by the hiss of gas lamps and the clatter of glass vials. Rockefeller medicine wasn't about wellness, it was about dependence. Cures became treatments, treatments became subscriptions, and humanity became a customer base. What happens when health stops being sacred and starts being business? The Rockefeller Institute for Medical Research didn't just shape medicine, it shaped minds. Its graduates filled universities, hospitals, and government agencies, rewriting the definition of science. Natural remedies, once common knowledge, were erased, and the public was taught to trust the system, even when that system was quietly owned by a single dynasty. By mid-century, Rockefeller-funded labs began researching genetic manipulation and population control, subjects once considered taboo. Behind sterile walls and polite smiles, the family had discovered a new empire, the human genome itself. The air inside those labs was cold, humming with electricity, the faint scent of alcohol, the sterile bite of bleach. They weren't saving lives, they were redesigning humanity. When one family owns science, truth becomes negotiable. From billion-dollar pharma giants to medical lobbying that dictates policy. The same formula remains: fear, control, and profit. The same ideology flows through modern healthcare system like invisible veins. If they could rewrite medicine, what stopped them from rewriting human destiny itself? But one secret was still waiting. Every war of the 20th century burned on Rockefeller oil. They said oil was the blood of industry, but to the Rockefellers, it was the blood of empires. From the deserts of Arabia to the fields of Europe, their pipelines didn't just carry crude, they carried control. When nations went to war, the Rockefellers didn't pick sides. They funded both. During World War I, Standard Oil of New Jersey secretly supplied fuel to both the Allied and Axis powers through a complex network of shell companies. While soldiers bled on the battlefield, Rockefeller profits surged. Letters unearthed decades later revealed quiet deals, fuel shipments routed through neutral nations, invoices buried under layers of corporate fog. The roar of engines, the stench of burning oil, and the screams of dying men all fed a single ledger. In World War II, things went darker. Standard Oil collaborated with IG Farben, the German chemical conglomerate that supplied materials for Nazi warfare. When questioned, executives claimed it was just business. But the truth, it was a pact between money and death. What price does humanity pay when power has no conscience? After the wars, Rockefeller Oil funded reconstruction projects, rebuilding the very cities their fuel had helped destroy. Each new refinery, each international deal, tightened their grip on global energy. They didn't just rebuild nations, they bought them. By the 1970s, their reach extended into OPEC negotiations, Middle Eastern monarchies, and intelligence operations designed to destabilize oil-rich countries. Every coup, every embargo, every crisis conveniently raised oil prices, and their wealth multiplied again. In 1973, while the world panicked over the oil crisis, the Rockefellers' private reserves quietly tripled in value. They called it a shortage, but it was strategy. You could hear the metallic clang of tankers loading in the night, smell the diesel, feel the tension in the humid air, a global economy dancing to one family's rhythm. They sold oil to both sides of history. Today, that legacy lives on. From the Gulf Wars to the energy politics of modern America, the fingerprints remain, disguised beneath new names, new corporations, and new wars. If oil could buy obedience, what happened when they learned to buy truth itself? But one secret was still waiting. Every generation of Rockefellers buried someone who died too soon, and no one ever talks about why. The wind howled through the Hudson Valley as the cameras flashed on yet another funeral. Black coats, cold rain, silent faces, a dynasty worth billions, haunted by deaths that seemed too frequent, too coincidental. Almost every Rockefeller heir linked to leadership died violently, mysteriously, or young. In 1937, John D. Rockefeller's grandson, John Rockefeller III, narrowly escaped death in a plane crash. His wife didn't. In 1951, Michael Rockefeller, the bright, idealistic son of Nelson Rockefeller, vanished in the jungles of New Guinea. His body was never found. Some say he drowned. Others whisper he was eaten by cannibals. The sound of the propeller echoes even now, thump, 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 like a heartbeat fading into the mist. Multiple heirs perished in aircraft accidents spanning decades, each just as the family expanded its political reach. From a mysterious private jet explosion in 1973 to a fatal crash in 2014 that killed one of the modern descendants, the pattern was too chilling to ignore. Plane after plane, air after air, death after death. Were these tragedies mere coincidence, or the curse of the world's most powerful dynasty? Inside the family, whispers grew louder. Servants swore of strange rituals, sudden illnesses, and deals sealed under moonlight in secluded estates. But the Rockefellers never spoke publicly, not once. Investigators found diaries hinting that John D. himself believed the family was marked for the price of their empire. He wrote of the burden of divine wealth and the shadow that always collects its due. The curse, some historians claim, was not supernatural, but psychological. Generations raised to carry impossible expectations, heirs who felt invincible until fate reminded them otherwise. The fear of death became a silent member of the Rockefeller family table, a cold, invisible guest. And yet, every new tragedy seemed to come just when another Rockefeller was poised for immense power, political, financial, or social. Could it really all be chance? Or was something darker feeding off their empire's guilt? From ancient money to modern mystery, the so-called Rockefeller curse mirrors today's billionaires, tech dynasties facing scandals, disappearances, and tragic downfalls of their own. History, it seems, loves repetition. The Rockefeller curse wasn't born, it was inherited. The air turns colder as we close this chapter, but the curse hasn't finished its work. But one secret was still waiting. They said the Rockefeller Empire was fading, but what if it was only changing its face? The grand halls of Picantico Hills grew quieter with every generation. The oil tycoons were gone. The factories that once powered America had turned to dust. Yet, somewhere behind closed boardroom doors, the Rockefellers still moved invisible strings that shaped nations. The modern Rockefellers don't rule with oil anymore. They rule with influence. Through banks, investment firms, green initiatives, and think tanks, the family reinvented itself. Names changed, faces diversified, but the bloodline remained. Each cousin held a different domain: politics, art, global health, media. It wasn't a dynasty dying. It was a dynasty going underground. The smell of cigar smoke once filled Rockefeller boardrooms. Now it's the faint buzz of iPhones, the hum of data servers, the click of PowerPoint slides shaping trillion-dollar decisions. The family's true fortune isn't public. It's scattered through shell companies, trusts, and global NGOs. Every generation the inheritance diluted, but control, it consolidated. What looked like family fragmentation was actually strategic decentralization. Instead of one king, the Rockefellers built a network of quiet rulers. Their descendants sit on the boards of J.P. Morgan Chase, ExxonMobil, Council on Foreign Relations, and even climate organizations that ironically fight the very industry their ancestors created. Power didn't disappear, it evolved. When a family's wealth is everywhere, does their power ever truly fade? While tabloids wrote about celebrity heirs and scandals, the Rockefellers were reshaping their influence through philanthropy and policy. Their decline was a distraction, the perfect camouflage. Behind environmental causes and humanitarian funds, investigators traced quiet financial webs linking back to old oil money. The same wealth that once polluted the world was now rebranding itself as its savior. Modern heirs rarely appear in headlines, but when they do, It's often at the heart of billion-dollar negotiations, international conferences, and foundation summits. And still the curse lingers. Suicides, sudden illnesses, broken alliances. Power fractures the soul even when the empire looks untouchable. Some say the new generation escaped their ancestors' shadows. Others say the curse simply changed its name. In an age where billionaires build rockets and buy social networks, the Rockefellers taught them the blueprint. They never lost power, they hid it. The family name may fade from history books, but its fingerprints remain in every corner of modern capitalism. But one secret was still waiting. A whistleblower vanished days before exposing the Rockefellers' hidden billions. The world thought the Rockefeller era had ended, but one email changed everything. A digital leak, 243 confidential files, hinted that the family's influence still lurked deep inside global finance. Offshore accounts, political donations, environmental funds masking fossil investments, the so-called Rockefeller Renaissance. The story began like a thriller, rain hammering Manhattan rooftops, thunder echoing over Wall Street. Inside a dim apartment, a data analyst named Elias Monroe typed his final message. They're not gone, they've just gone deeper. Hours later, he disappeared. The leaked documents traced billions through nonprofit fronts tied to Rockefeller foundations. Funds meant for climate action were quietly funneled into lobbying firms influencing oil policy worldwide. Every transaction looked clean, but together they told a different story. The empire was still alive, feeding from the shadows. Visceral detail, the sound of hard drives whirring, the stale smell of burnt coffee, the flicker of neon lights reflecting off encrypted screens, painted a scene straight out of a cyber-noir film. This wasn't just history resurfacing, it was power mutating. A legal intern uncovered sealed court files, lawsuits buried for decades involving family trusts and silenced victims. Lawsuits alleging manipulation of state contracts, labor exploitation, and undisclosed environmental damage resurfaced under new names. Each time, settlements followed. Each time, silence bought peace. The deeper investigators dug, the more they realized. This wasn't a series of coincidences. It was an unbroken chain of control stretching from the oil rigs of 1910 to the digital empires of 2025. How much truth can the world handle before the system that hides it collapses? Reporters who tried to follow the trail faced lawsuits, job losses, and in two cases, mysterious accidents. One court clerk described the Rockefeller legal team as an invisible army with golden armor. A confidential memo revealed a crisis, an internal feud among the heirs over how far the cover-up should go. Some younger Rockefellers wanted transparency. Others believed secrecy was survival. What started as a corporate dispute became a family war, played not with guns, but with data, blackmail, and billion-dollar leverage. The climax came when one heir broke silence, calling their wealth a blessing drenched in blood and silence. And just like that, interview stopped, subpoenas vanished, the files went dark. Yet whispers remain. Some say Elias Monroe's missing hard drive is still out there, encrypted, waiting to be unlocked. Others claim it was destroyed by those it threatened most. Today, new dynasties, the Musks, the Bezoses, the Gates, follow similar patterns of secrecy and philanthropy. The torch of invisible power never extinguished. It just passed hands. The whistleblower who knew too much. The Rockefellers won every courtroom battle, but they could never escape one thing, their own legacy. But one secret was still waiting. They never appeared in headlines, but they controlled everything from the shadows. For over a century, the Rockefeller name echoed with power, politics, and wealth. But behind the oil men and bankers stood the women, silent architects of influence, masters of discretion, and keepers of secrets. When John D. Rockefeller built his empire, the world saw a titan. But it was Laura Spelman Rockefeller, his wife, who taught him restraint, image control, and the art of moral camouflage. She turned ruthless capitalism into divine destiny, rebranding greed as God's plan. The Rockefeller women weren't just socialites, they were strategic manipulators of power. Through charity galas, social clubs, and elite schools, they shaped public opinion long before television or social media existed. They knew that real control wasn't taken with force, it was given through trust. A faint scent of perfume still lingers in the halls of Picantico Hills, where whispers of secret meetings and coded letters between Rockefeller wives spoke of alliances, betrayals, and hidden heirs. One letter, historians claim, even mentioned a woman who holds the future of the dynasty in her hands. One Rockefeller woman allegedly orchestrated a Wall Street deal under a false name, decades before women could legally vote. Documents found in an archived estate ledger suggest a mysterious L.R. Carter moved stocks worth millions during the Panic of 1907. Later handwriting analysis matched Laura Rockefeller's personal letters. Visceral detail, the sound of pens scratching parchment, the flicker of candlelight on ink-stained fingertips, paints a portrait of power so subtle, it almost escaped history itself. How many empires in history were truly ruled by the men who claimed them? The legacy continued. Abby Aldrich Rockefeller married into art and politics, helping birth the Museum of Modern Art, not as culture, but as propaganda, shaping how America saw itself during wartime. Behind every Rockefeller foundation, there was often a woman deciding who deserved redemption and who didn't. Internal letters between the women revealed their greatest fear, not losing wealth, but losing control of the narrative. They knew that perception was more dangerous than poverty. If the world ever saw the cracks beneath their perfection, the dynasty could crumble. Even now, modern Rockefeller women serve on global boards and nonprofits, their influence woven through finance, media, and diplomacy. Quiet, elegant, lethal in reputation management. But for all their brilliance, they too felt the curse. Marriages dissolved, children vanished into anonymity. Generational guilt took root, passed like a genetic code. Their reflections in gold-framed mirrors might have smiled, but their eyes carried the weight of centuries. The women of the dynasty never sought the spotlight. They built it and decided who got to stand in it. The real Rockefellers wore pearls, not power suits. And yet one diary, hidden in a locked drawer for 80 years, hinted at a truth so dangerous it could rewrite the Rockefeller story itself. But one secret was still waiting. 3 heirs to the Rockefeller fortune vanished, and no one ever found their bodies. The Rockefeller family name was supposed to guarantee immortality. Yet, generation after generation, it left behind disappearances that defied logic. Heirs lost at sea, vanished in jungles, or erased from family records. The most haunting began in 1961, when Michael Rockefeller, the 23-year-old son of New York's governor, disappeared off the coast of New Guinea. His last words, shouted over the roar of ocean waves, still echo through history. "I think I can make it to shore." He was never seen again. Locals whispered that Michael didn't drown, he was taken. Tribal accounts spoke of a white man who came from the sea and never left. Rumors claimed he was killed, while others swore he lived among the Asmat people, trading his old identity for freedom from the Rockefeller curse. Visceral detail, the salt burning his skin, waves crashing against the wooden canoe, his heartbeat pounding louder than the storm, all frozen in the last photograph he ever took. But Michael wasn't the only one to vanish. Over decades, other heirs quietly disappeared through exile, addiction, or scandal. Some weren't declared missing, just erased. Investigators found sealed family archives referencing black sheep funds, secret payouts for heirs cut off from the dynasty. Each file carried a single chilling phrase, "removed for protection." Some of these disowned Rockefellers tried to rebuild lives under new names, but tragedy followed them: suicides, accidents, unexplained disappearances. It was as if the family's wealth carried an invisible gravity, pulling every lost heir back toward darkness. What if the Rockefeller curse isn't death, but disappearance? Every missing Rockefeller became another ghost in the dynasty's history, their absence neatly rewritten in press releases and genealogies. Behind smiles and family portraits, the truth was scrubbed clean, replaced by myths of heroism, tragedy, or unfortunate travel accidents. In 2014, a declassified CIA memo hinted that Michael Rockefeller's disappearance may have involved covert operations, linking oil interests in Indonesia to political cover-ups. If true, it meant the heir didn't just vanish, he was silenced. The curse didn't strike with lightning or poison. It struck with erasure, the slow vanishing of identity swallowed by legacy. Today, conspiracy forums and digital sleuths claim to have found living descendants of erased Rockefellers in South America, Eastern Europe, even rural Asia. Some refuse DNA tests. Others deny their ancestry completely. But every few years, another face surfaces, hauntingly familiar, impossibly connected. Heirs vanished, money stayed. The curse didn't end with Michael. In a family where wealth meant power, and power meant silence, vanishing became the final escape. But one secret was still waiting. He was the only Rockefeller who dared to say, "I reject the empire." In a family built on oil, power, and legacy, one heir tried to burn the script. His name was John Davison Rockefeller IV, J., the grandson of the world's first billionaire. While others embraced their gilded inheritance, Jay sought redemption. He didn't want to rule the world, he wanted to change it. But inside the Rockefeller family, rebellion had a price. Jay didn't just turn against the family business, he exposed its inner rot. Through political service and reform, he began peeling away the myth of Rockefeller perfection. He spoke of inequality, corporate corruption, and even criticized the very institutions that carried his bloodline's fingerprints. In private meetings, old family allies whispered that Jay was breaking the blood pact. The tension was suffocating, the smell of old money and old fear lingering in oak-paneled rooms, where portraits of ancestors seemed to watch him like silent judges. Family archives reveal that several attempts were made to isolate him financially and politically. Donors vanished, supporters backed out, even his speeches were edited before publication. But Jay didn't flinch, he kept speaking. He once told a reporter, Power can heal or it can poison. My family taught me both. For the first time, the world saw Rockefeller not as a titan, but as a man haunted by the curse of his own name. Can a man truly break free from a curse written in blood? Jay's rebellion became symbolic, not just for the Rockefellers, but for every heir trapped by the ghosts of dynasty. His empathy and defiance threatened generations of carefully built image control. Leaked letters from family members show that Jay's activism caused a secret rift. A council of heirs was formed to keep him in check. They feared that one man's conscience could unravel a century of control. But Jay didn't back down. He championed healthcare, education, and equality, causes that cut straight through the empire's old wounds. And yet, the deeper he tried to redeem the Rockefeller name, the more tragedy seemed to circle him. Family members fell ill, deals collapsed, old secrets resurfaced. It was as if the curse was punishing rebellion itself. In interviews, Jay's tone grew somber, almost prophetic. Every empire ends. The only question is, how much of your soul do you lose trying to save it? Some say he succeeded in cleansing part of the legacy. Others believe he simply fed the curse new life by bringing it back into the light. He fought his own bloodline. The last heir who stood against the curse didn't vanish, but what he uncovered next would shake even his own faith. But one secret was still waiting. Behind the world's richest family stood something older than money, faith twisted into power. To the public, the Rockefellers were devout Baptists, churchgoers, donors, and paragons of American virtue. But behind closed doors, their faith wasn't just religion, it was strategy. A belief system engineered to sanctify wealth, to turn divine favor into generational dominance. The Rockefellers didn't just pray to God, they built a system where they decided who got to speak in his name. In the early 1900s, John D. Rockefeller quietly began funding entire denominations, seminaries, and theological schools, rewriting the soul of American Christianity. He poured millions into reshaping doctrine, encouraging sermons that preached obedience, discipline, and acceptance of hierarchy. Churchgoers thought they were learning faith. They were being taught compliance. One internal memo from a Rockefeller-funded board read, "Religion must never rebel. It must guide the worker to his duty, not his rebellion." The pulpit had become the empire's most subtle weapon. The family's crown jewel, the Rockefeller Foundation, disguised control as charity. While publicly funding hospitals and schools, they quietly influenced global education standards, health ethics, and even the language of morality itself. Historians now call it the gospel of efficiency. To the Rockefellers, saving the world meant owning the blueprint of salvation. In Sunday schools across America, children learned hymns written by men paid through Rockefeller endowments. The music was beautiful, but its message was obedience wrapped in holiness. A secret branch of this faith movement emerged, not a church, but a network of thinkers, pastors, and financiers nicknamed the Shadow Church. Their purpose: to align business, faith, and morality under one global vision, a sanctified capitalism. Even missionaries carried Rockefeller funding, spreading what one scholar called a purified version of the American dream, baptized in oil. To outsiders, it looked like generosity. To insiders, it was quiet conquest. Can belief still be pure when it's funded by empire? Some theologians whispered that the family's fortune carried a curse, not of ghosts, but of guilt. Because the same oil money that built churches also buried men in mines, in fields, in silence. And perhaps deep down, that was the true horror. That faith became a mirror in which the Rockefellers saw their sins and called it salvation. In his later years, a family insider confessed. They stopped believing in God long ago. They began believing in themselves. And when you replace God with power, you create a shadow that no light can cleanse. Because faith built on control doesn't lead to heaven. It leads to something far older and far darker. They didn't serve God, they manufactured him. Even in death, the Rockefellers refused to let go of control. The world saw grand mausoleums, marble crypts, and public funerals, symbols of wealth, reverence, and legacy. But behind closed gates at Sleepy Hollow Cemetery and private estates, death was more than ritual, it was a coded message, a final exercise of power. Each burial carried symbolism only insiders understood. Gold-plated urns, precise orientations of graves, and specific family members present or absent were all calculated to protect the dynasty from beyond the grave. A private diary uncovered in 1923 revealed that John D. Rockefeller dictated instructions for his own death ceremonies decades in advance. He arranged cryptic symbols, secret vaults, and hidden passages in mausoleums, all designed to channel influence even after leaving the body. Family insiders whispered that some graves were never meant for rest. They were archives of secrets, letters, and accounts meant to be discovered only by chosen heirs. The smell of incense lingered, and the chill of early autumn wrapped around the graves, a sensory reminder that death in the Rockefeller world was ceremonial, deliberate, and hauntingly precise. Some historians believe that the family used death rituals to control succession, manipulate inheritance, and even intimidate living relatives. Reports surfaced of heirs left out of funerals, missing critical documents, or bound by oaths to remain silent. It wasn't superstition, it was psychological engineering. One record mentions a coffin lined with lead, holding both ashes and confidential financial ledgers, a literal tomb for secrets. The world mourned a billionaire. The family ensured their empire endured. What if death is just another boardroom for the Rockefellers? Over decades, strange patterns emerged. Sudden illnesses, unexplained accidents, and unusual wills that seemed to punish or reward heirs based on compliance with the family's secret code. Even today, forensic researchers and journalists occasionally stumble across cryptic letters hinting at rituals that influenced global investments long after the original tycoon died. A confidential report suggested that some Rockefeller funerals included symbolic items, books, paintings, and personal effects, whose placement dictated power distribution for the next generation. It was as if the dead continued making deals, shaping policies, philanthropy, and wealth from beyond the grave. Despite centuries of public scrutiny, one burial site remains untouched, unphotographed, and shrouded in mystery. Insiders say it contains the ultimate Rockefeller secret, the key to the family's influence, wealth, and perhaps the curse itself. Even in death, they controlled everything. Every hospital, school, and museum carried a hidden agenda. To the world, the Rockefellers were the ultimate philanthropists, funding education, healthcare, and art. But behind the ribbon cuttings and gala speeches, there was a subtle, far-reaching design, control through generosity. They gave money and in doing so dictated how it was spent, who could benefit, and which voices could be heard. Each donation wasn't just charity, it was influence disguised as goodwill. Internal memos show that Rockefeller-funded institutions had clauses ensuring board members were loyal to family interests. Hospitals followed protocols aligned with Rockefeller healthcare priorities. Universities taught courses shaped by their ideals. Even research agendas were guided to favor industries connected to the family's holdings. It was philanthropy with a subtle leash, giving the appearance of benevolence while quietly molding society. Visceral detail, the rustle of banknotes, the faint scent of ink on grant documents, and the quiet ticking of clocks in boardrooms made generosity feel like a calculated operation, cold and precise. The family learned early. The best way to wield power was to make people grateful for it. Documents reveal secret funding of think tanks that shaped U.S. economic policy for decades. Through charitable fronts, the Rockefellers influenced taxation, banking, and environmental policy, often without the public realizing who pulled the strings. Every philanthropic gesture was a chess move in a century-long game of influence. When does charity stop being altruism and become manipulation? From the Rockefeller Foundation to major global health initiatives, the line between good intentions and control blurred. Even today, modern foundations trace their strategies back to Rockefeller principles, proving that the empire's influence is alive, evolving, and invisible. A whistleblower claimed that some funds were redirected into corporate ventures that secretly profited the family. While appearing to help the poor, some donations effectively bolstered industries tied to the family's oil and finance empire. Public applause masked private gain. The philanthropy that shaped modern medicine, education, and science may also hold keys to the Rockefeller Curse, a blueprint of influence that stretches beyond generations. And somewhere, hidden in ledgers yet to be revealed, lies the family's most daring secret, the gift that controls the world. Every donation was a calculated power move. But one secret was still waiting. They didn't just drill for oil, they drilled into the soul of America. The Rockefeller name became synonymous with oil, and with power that extended far beyond the ground. Standard Oil, founded by John D. Rockefeller in 1870, wasn't merely a business. It was a mechanism of control, greed, and near-perfect monopoly. By the turn of the century, Rockefeller's strategies reshaped entire industries, crushed competitors, and dictated who lived and who failed. Secret agreements with railroads allowed Standard Oil to manipulate transport costs, cornering markets without public scrutiny. Competitors were forced to sell at ruinous prices or vanish. Entire towns dependent on oil felt the grip of a dynasty few understood. Imagine the hiss of steam engines, the smell of crude in the air, and the nervous chatter of rival businessmen as they realized the empire was untouchable. Internal memos reveal strategies for driving competitors into bankruptcy, sometimes through clandestine rebates and secret alliances. Rockefeller's business was surgical, precise, ruthless, and invisible to the public eye. Oil wasn't just fuel. It was influence, leveraged to shape politics, society, and even foreign policy. When a business controls a nation's energy, who really holds the power? The empire reached into Congress, swayed regulations, and funneled wealth into ventures that reinforced the family's dominance. The monopoly eventually drew legal challenges. The Sherman Antitrust Act of 1911 broke Standard Oil into 34 companies. But by then, the Rockefeller name had already imprinted itself across generations. Even after dissolution, Rockefeller heirs quietly maintained stakes in the successor companies, ensuring they controlled markets under multiple fronts. Oil profits were transformed into banks, railroads, media, and philanthropy, creating an ecosystem of influence almost impossible to trace. Standard Oil may have been dismantled, but the empire's shadows remain. Every pipeline, every refinery, and every corporate boardroom hides traces of a dynasty that doesn't just survive, it thrives in secrecy. They didn't just own oil, they owned power. And somewhere, buried in decades of financial ledgers, a plan remains, one capable of reshaping global energy forever. But one secret was still waiting. They didn't just fund elections, they wrote the rules behind them. The Rockefeller Empire extended far beyond oil and philanthropy. It reached into the very heart of American politics. Generations of presidents, senators, and global policymakers were influenced, steered, or silently backed by the family's immense wealth. Campaigns were funded, speeches crafted, and policies shaped, not always in public view. To outsiders, the Rockefellers were patriots. To insiders, they were puppet masters disguised in philanthropy and diplomacy. Declassified correspondence revealed that the Rockefellers quietly advised multiple U.S. presidents on foreign policy during the Cold War. From oil interests in the Middle East to trade deals in Latin America, the family subtly directed the course of nations. Their fingerprints were everywhere, on arms treaties, diplomatic visits, and even clandestine intelligence operations. Visceral detail, the faint scent of cigar smoke in the Oval Office, polished mahogany reflecting hidden letters, and the soft scratch of fountain pens plotting decisions unknown to the public, all echoing the family's quiet omnipresence. Rockefeller-backed think tanks influenced policy research, education, and even economic forecasts, shaping legislation before it ever reached Congress. Every white paper, conference, and seminar subtly aligned with the dynasty's vision, ensuring that democracy itself bent around their agenda. The family didn't need to be seen. Their influence was invisible, yet absolute. How much of American history was written by men in shadows, not on ballots? Rockefeller political reach also extended to global diplomacy. Funding initiatives under the guise of international development allowed the family to control energy, banking, and trade across continents, subtly guiding global power structures for over a century. A confidential 1970s memo revealed the family's strategy to encourage leaders who favor stability, growth, and compliance with elite agendas. This wasn't just politics. It was social engineering on a scale the public could barely comprehend. Every handshake, every donation, and every private dinner could have consequences felt decades later. The Rockefellers' political chessboard remains active, a reminder that the family empire survives not just through wealth, but through invisible dominion over power itself. They didn't run the country, they rode it. And in the shadows, whispers of a plan even deeper than politics continue to circulate. But one secret was still waiting. They didn't just own oil or banks, they owned the story itself. The Rockefeller family understood something early. Information is power. Controlling newspapers, magazines, and eventually broadcasting allowed them to shape public opinion, influence elections, and rewrite history in subtle ways. From glossy philanthropy reports to headlines about global crises, the narrative always bent toward empire interests. Truth became a commodity, and the Rockefellers were its silent brokers. Internal memos revealed Rockefeller-funded media outlets were used to quietly suppress stories that threatened the family's influence. Reports of labor unrest, environmental damage, or corporate scandals often disappeared into private archives, never printed, never broadcast. Journalists who persisted found careers mysteriously stalled. The hum of printing presses, the shuffle of typed pages, and the faint smell of ink were all tools of control, shaping what Americans believed without their knowledge. By mid-20th century, the family was indirectly linked to major television networks, giving them unprecedented influence over what millions watched nightly. From entertainment to news, every broadcast subtly reinforced social norms, consumerism, and respect for authority, values aligned with the family's vision. It wasn't censorship in the traditional sense. It was storytelling as governance, invisible yet omnipresent. If the media shapes reality, who truly controls history? Viral studies now show Rockefeller-linked foundations, funded media literacy programs, and journalism grants, but with strings attached. Every article, documentary, and research piece could be subtly guided to protect corporate interests while cultivating a compliant public mindset. Leaked correspondence suggests some outlets were instructed to highlight philanthropy while burying environmental devastation caused by family-owned industries. It was a masterclass in narrative dominance, controlling both the story and the storyteller. Even today, the echo of this media empire resonates. Algorithms, digital platforms, and streaming services now operate in ways that mirror the same control Rockefeller-funded media once exerted. The story is still being told, just on a global digital scale. The story belonged to them, not the people. And behind every headline, every broadcast, one truth remains buried. But one secret was still waiting. Their influence didn't stop at borders, it spanned continents in shadows. The Rockefellers weren't just American moguls, they were global strategists. Through banks, corporations, and philanthropic organizations, their tentacles reached Europe, Asia, Africa, and beyond. Every alliance, treaty, and venture carried subtle fingerprints of empire, a network designed to shape economies and governments worldwide. Leaked documents revealed Rockefeller-funded programs secretly advised foreign governments on economic policy and industrial development. Nations unknowingly followed frameworks designed to benefit the family's investments, often at the expense of local populations. The hum of fax machines, the shuffle of confidential reports, and the low murmur of private boardroom negotiations were all part of a silent empire-building machine. Some alliances included secret agreements with multinational corporations, universities, and think tanks, creating a global network that blurred lines between public policy and private gain. Trade policies, infrastructure projects, and energy deals often carried hidden clauses favoring Rockefeller interests. It wasn't conquest by armies. It was control by contracts, influence, and strategic generosity. What happens when a single family's reach shapes the fate of nations? Through the Rockefeller Foundation, the family funded international health initiatives, research institutes, and cultural programs, all under the guise of benevolence. But behind the polished facade, every grant, every scholarship, and every global partnership reinforced a subtle framework of influence and compliance. Intelligence reports from the 1960s hinted at collaboration with political elites and covert advisors in multiple countries. An international web where decisions were guided by Rockefeller strategy. The empire wasn't visible on maps. It was invisible, calculated, and almost untouchable. Even today, corporations, policy think tanks, and international institutions carry vestiges of Rockefeller influence. Their empire may no longer be secret, but its reach remains quietly formidable, continuing to shape global economics and politics from behind the scenes. Borders couldn't stop their shadow empire. And buried within this web of alliances lies a single pact, one that could expose the full extent of Rockefeller power. But one secret was still waiting. Even dynasties built on fortune aren't immune to betrayal and bloodlines of shame. The Rockefeller name evokes wealth, philanthropy, and influence. But beneath the gilded surface lurked scandals that rattled both family and nation. From financial cover-ups to hidden affairs, and from mysterious deaths to whispered betrayals, the empire wasn't always as polished as the public perceived. Every headline hid a layer of manipulation. Every family event concealed a lesson in secrecy. In the 1930s, a dispute over inheritance escalated into a bitter feud between Rockefeller heirs. Letters revealed threats, coerced agreements, and even the mysterious disappearance of sensitive documents, all designed to protect the family name and fortune. Whispers of duels, secret transfers, and blackmail campaigns swirled through the corridors of wealth. The velvet-lined halls of the estate carried echoes of hushed arguments, the snap of doors, and the faint smell of expensive cigars masking tension. Decades later, environmental lawsuits and labor scandals tied to family-owned companies ignited public outrage. While media outlets reported isolated incidents, investigative journalists uncovered patterns suggesting deliberate suppression and strategic influence. The world saw charity. The family ensured the scandal never threatened their broader empire. Can absolute power survive without corruption and secrecy? Even today, leaked financial audits and investigative reports hint at covert deals, offshore trusts, and political maneuvering. The scandals aren't just historical. They inform how modern dynasties operate, from global corporations to political families. A confidential report revealed that some family members were ostracized for exposing wrongdoing, proving loyalty to the empire outweighed morality. Blood ties weren't always protection. They were sometimes weapons. Despite decades of public scrutiny, many scandals remain buried, their full extent known only to insiders and the vaults of the Rockefeller archives. One revelation could rewrite the narrative of the American empire forever. Fortune doesn't hide betrayal. And behind the polished reputation, a single damning scandal waits to surface. But one secret was still waiting. They didn't just fund schools, they built invisible classrooms of control. Rockefeller influence stretched far beyond business and politics. By the early 20th century, the family had infiltrated universities, research institutes, and educational foundations, quietly shaping curricula, funding programs, and molding the next generation of leaders. Scholarships, grants, And research funding came with strings, subtle yet powerful, ensuring the family's worldview became a blueprint for students and policymakers alike. Documents reveal that Rockefeller-funded programs strategically promoted capitalism, industrial compliance, and specific scientific research agendas. Courses in economics, sociology, and public policy often reflected the family's priorities, quietly molding public opinion and professional thinking for decades. Imagine lecture halls filled with eager students, unaware that every textbook and every professor subtly echoed the family's philosophy, a gentle hand guiding ambition in alignment with empire interests. Some scholars discovered that research grants were sometimes withheld or redirected if findings contradicted Rockefeller-aligned corporate or philanthropic interests. This wasn't coercion in public. It was psychological influence through opportunity and exclusion, shaping which voices thrived and which were silenced. Even universities overseas bore Rockefeller fingerprints, spreading influence internationally while maintaining the veneer of global education and humanitarianism. What happens when the architects of knowledge control both the lessons and the learners? From funding prestigious universities to directing think tanks, the family created an ecosystem where power, privilege, and ideology intertwined. Decades later, alumni of these programs became politicians, corporate executives, and academics, unknowingly perpetuating Rockefeller influence across society. A confidential memo suggested that select educational programs were designed to train future leaders in loyalty to elite networks, not just competence. Education became both a ladder and a leash guiding ambition along invisible rails. The legacy of Rockefeller education is visible in every boardroom, government office, and research lab, a testament to quiet influence with lasting consequences. And hidden within the family's archives lies a curriculum never meant for public eyes, one that could reveal the full extent of their intellectual dominion. Education disguised as influence. But one secret was still waiting. Every masterpiece they owned hid a secret the world wasn't meant to see. The Rockefellers weren't just patrons of wealth or philanthropy, they were curators of influence. Their art collection, spanning centuries and continents, showcased power, taste, and vision, but also served as a silent language of control and messaging. From oil paintings to rare sculptures, each acquisition was meticulously chosen, often conveying hidden narratives about the family's philosophy, alliances, and ambitions. Some artworks were strategically purchased to solidify relationships with European elites and global collectors. Galleries and museums funded by the family became arenas of influence, where private discussions about politics, finance, and strategy occurred under the guise of culture. Imagine walking through grand halls, the faint scent of varnish and aged canvas in the air, while whispers of deals, alliances, and secrets echo softly, an empire hidden behind beauty. Certain pieces contained hidden codes, inscriptions, or symbols linked to family alliances and financial strategies. Scholars studying these artifacts discovered that the Rockefellers weren't just collectors. They were communicating discreetly across borders and generations through art. The collection wasn't just aesthetic. It was a visual ledger of power, influence, and secrecy. Could art be more than expression, a tool for empire and control? Even today, pieces from the Rockefeller collection carry influence, exhibited in major museums and auctioned at astronomical prices. The family ensured their taste dictated cultural trends, while embedding messages only a select few could decode. Leaked correspondences suggested that some art acquisitions were intended to obscure controversial investments or political ties. Every frame, every sculpture, every gallery was carefully curated to protect the family's narrative while signaling power behind closed doors. The Rockefeller art empire was more than collection. It was influence crystallized into beauty. And hidden within the vaults of priceless works lies a piece that could rewrite public understanding of the family's intentions and connections. Art as power, influence, and intrigue. But one secret was still waiting. They didn't just drill for oil, they hid entire reserves from the world. The Rockefeller Empire wasn't just about visible pipelines and refineries. Beneath the surface lay hidden oil reserves, undisclosed contracts, and clandestine strategies that controlled global supply, and by extension, global power. While the public celebrated technological breakthroughs, the family quietly manipulated markets, stock values, and even international crises to maintain dominance. Internal documents revealed secret storage facilities and undisclosed reserves in multiple continents, allowing the family to control oil scarcity and pricing. Competitors and governments remained oblivious, while the Rockefellers dictated energy availability with near-perfect precision. Visceral detail. Imagine the distant roar of oil pumps, the acrid smell of crude, and the silent, almost ritualistic counting of barrels in underground vaults, power measured in darkness and secrecy. Correspondence shows that the family sometimes delayed production or withheld reserves during political conflicts, subtly influencing elections, trade negotiations, and even wars. It wasn't just business. It was geopolitics engineered from a family office. Every decision could ripple through economies, reshaping nations without a single headline. How much of global energy policy has been written in secret boardrooms? Even in the 21st century, successor companies and trusts tied to Rockefeller holdings continue to impact oil futures, stock markets, and international energy policy. Modern crises and price surges often trace back to strategies developed decades ago, proof that dynasty influence never truly fades. Analysts uncovered that some strategic oil reserves were intentionally unreported to manipulate global prices, creating both scarcity and profit simultaneously. This subtle control shaped the global economy while maintaining the illusion of a free market. The Rockefeller oil empire remains an invisible force, influencing energy, geopolitics, and wealth accumulation across generations. And buried deep within undisclosed reserves lies a record of deals and strategies powerful enough to shock the world if revealed. Oil wasn't business, it was domination. But one secret was still waiting. Every gift they gave had a hidden price attached. The Rockefeller name is synonymous with philanthropy. Hospitals, universities, and global initiatives bear their legacy of generosity. But beneath the polished veneer lies a calculated strategy of influence and control. Charitable donations weren't simply altruism. They were a mechanism to shape society, guide research, and direct public policy under the guise of benevolence. Internal letters revealed that grants often came with explicit expectations, steering recipients to align with Rockefeller priorities. From social sciences to medical research, Every project funded subtly promoted the family's worldview, corporate interests, and global strategies. Imagine the quiet ticking of clocks in foundation offices, the rustle of meticulously stacked proposals, and the faint scent of polished wood, the machinery of influence disguised as charity. Some donations strategically targeted institutions that trained future leaders, ensuring that key decision-makers were educated under Rockefeller-aligned ideologies. Philanthropy became a dual weapon, building public goodwill while shaping policy, thought, and societal norms behind the scenes. Even international aid initiatives carried hidden agendas, subtly influencing developing nations while maintaining a facade of humanitarianism. Can generosity survive when it's guided by power and hidden motives? Modern dynasties mirror this model. Strategic philanthropy now drives corporate influence, global initiatives, and political sway. Rockefeller giving was not just about improving lives. It was about ensuring the family's ideology and dominance persisted across generations. Confidential reports indicated some philanthropic programs actively suppressed research or initiatives that conflicted with family interests. Even kindness was measured, monitored, and curated charity as a calculated instrument of control. The Rockefeller philanthropy paradox is still felt today. Generosity and power remain intertwined, leaving the world to question how much of progress was organic and how much engineered. Every gift hid a hidden agenda, but one secret was still waiting. After more than a century, the Rockefeller Empire still pulls invisible strings. The Rockefellers may no longer dominate headlines for oil or media, but their legacy thrives in wealth, influence, and secrecy. Modern corporations, think tanks, and philanthropic networks still carry their blueprint, subtly guiding global economics, politics, and culture. From boardrooms in New York to global summits, the empire quietly shapes decisions, controls narratives, and influences outcomes. A dynasty whose power is seen only by those who know where to look. Modern trusts and investment networks reveal that the family's wealth is still strategically diversified across emerging technologies, energy, and media. Their influence has adapted to the digital age, ensuring that the same dynasty controlling oil now controls data, finance, and information flow. Imagine the faint hum of servers, the glow of screens tracking investments worldwide, and the quiet tapping of keyboards executing unseen strategies. The pulse of a hidden empire in real time. Analysts uncovered subtle Rockefeller involvement in global policy, think tanks, and educational foundations, guiding the next generation of leaders and innovators. The dynasty's reach now spans finance, technology, politics, and culture, a seamless transition from visible power to invisible influence. No explosions, no headlines, just quiet control, quietly executed on a global scale. What part of today's world is truly independent, and what part still answers to the Rockefeller shadow? Even scandals, investigations, and regulatory changes fail to fully pierce the empire. From AI and renewable energy to international banking and media, Rockefeller strategies quietly echo across industries, shaping outcomes and ensuring survival. Confidential financial reports suggest emerging investments in critical global infrastructure and technology may expand influence for decades to come. The family isn't just surviving, it's evolving. Its secrets remain as guarded and powerful as ever. The Rockefeller dynasty is not history. It is an ongoing story of wealth, secrecy, and power, a reminder that empires never truly die. They adapt, endure, and silently dictate the future. The empire thrives, unseen but unbroken. But one secret was still waiting.